House has no confidence in Her Majesty's government. The Prime Minister. Order.
Mr. Speaker, sir, it is of course the right and duty of Her Majesty's opposition to challenge the position of the government of the day. It's also their right to test the confidence of this House in the government if they think the circumstances warrant it. I make no complaint about that. But when the Right Honourable Gentleman's windy rhetoric has blown away, what are their real reasons for bringing this motion before the House? Because there were no alternative policies. There were just a lot of disjointed, opaque words. It can't be complained about Britain's standing in the world. That is deservedly high, not least because of our contribution to ending the Cold War and to the spread of democracy through Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. Achievements celebrated at the historic meeting in Paris from which I returned yesterday. It can't be the nation's finances. We are repaying debt, including the debt run up by the party of the Right Honourable Gentleman opposite. And it can't be the government's inability to carry forward its programme for the year ahead. Announced in the gracious speech on the 7th of November, we carried that debate by a majority of 108. The opposition's real reason is the leadership election for the Conservative Party. A democratic election according to rules which have been public knowledge for many years, one member, one vote. A far cry from the way the opposition do these things. 2 in every 5 votes for their leader are cast by the trade union bloc votes, which has a bigger say than do honourable members opposite in that decision. Precious little democracy there. The real issue to be decided by my right honourable and honourable friends is how best to build on the achievements of the 1980s. How to carry Conservative policies through to the 90s. How to add to 3 general election victories a 4th, which we shall surely win. Look at the opposition. 11 years ago, we rescued Britain from the parlous state to which socialism had brought it. I remind this House that under socialism, this country had come to such a pass that one of our most able and distinguished ambassadors felt compelled to write in a famous dispatch, a copy of which found its way into The Economist, the following words. He said, "We talk of ourselves without shame as being one of the less prosperous countries of Europe. The prognosis for the foreseeable future," he said in 1979, "was discouraging. Conservative government has changed all that." Once again, Britain stands tall in the councils of Europe and of the world. And our policies have brought unparalleled prosperity to our citizens at home. Mr. Speaker, over the last decade, we have given power back to the people on an unprecedented scale. We've given back control to people over their own lives and over their livelihood, over the decisions that matter most to them and their families. We've done it by curbing the monopoly power of trade unions to control, even victimize the individual worker. Labour would return us to conflict, confrontation, and government by the consent of the TUC. We have done it by enabling families to own their homes, not least through the sale of 1.25 million council houses. Labour oppose our new rents to mortgage initiative that will spread the benefits of ownership wider still. And we've done it by giving people choice in public services. Which school is right for their children? Which training course is best for the school leaver? Which doctor they choose to look after their health, and which hospital they want for their treatment. Labour are against spreading these freedoms and choice to all our people. They are against us giving power back to the people by privatising nationalised industries. 11 million people now own shares, and 7.5 million have registered an interest in buying electricity shares. Labour want to renationalise electricity and water and British telecoms. They want to take power back to the state, back into their own grasp. And that is a fitful and debilitating grasp. For
Martin Flannery.
When the right lady says that she's giving power back to the people, those people, over 2 million of them, are unemployed. Has she given power back to them? 10.9% inflation. Is that power back to us when all the rest of Europe? Is the 100 billion of North Sea oil frittered away that no other nations had, giving power back to the people? Will she kindly explain these particular points and let us know where pushing large numbers of people into cardboard boxes and taking power away from them is somehow giving power back to them?
2 million more jobs since 1979 is a great deal more opportunity for people. Yes, 10.9% inflation is much higher than it should be. It's a lot less than a 26.9 that there was under Labour opposite. Yes, we have benefited from North Sea oil, and this government has seen to it that there are great investments abroad that will give us an income in this country long after North Sea oil has ceased. And therefore, we have provided colossal investment for future generations. Honourable gentlemen opposite ran up debts which we have repaid. We are providing investment for the future. We do not believe in living at the expense of the future.
Mr. Nillist!
If things are quite so good as the Prime Minister is outlining today, why aren't all her colleagues behind her happy to have her continue in the job of defending that record?
Mr. Speaker, these are the reasons why we shall win a fourth general election. We have been down in the polls before when we've taken difficult decisions. The essence of a good government is that it is prepared to take difficult decisions to get the long-term prosperity. That is what we have achieved, and that is why we shall win handsomely when a general election comes. Now, I was talking about the Labour Party wanting to renationalise privatised industry. 4 of the industries we have privatised are now in the top 10 British businesses. And at the very bottom of the list of 1,000 British businesses lie 4 nationalised industries. Labour's industries consume the wealth others create and give nothing back. Mr. Speaker, it is because individuals and families now have more power and more choice that they have more opportunities to succeed, more jobs, 2 million more than in 1979, better rewards for hard work, income tax down from 33 pence in the pound to 25 pence in the pound, and no surcharge on savings income either, living standards up by 1/3, more new businesses, 400,000 new businesses since 1979, over 700 every week, and a better future for our children. Thanks to their hard work, success and enterprise, our people are better off than ever before. Indeed, the average pensioner, just listen, you might hear something really which you didn't know. Listen, the average pensioner now has twice as much to hand on to his children as 11 years ago. Really are thinking about the future. This massive rise in our living standards reflects the extraordinary transformation of the private sector. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
There is no doubt that the Prime Minister has in many ways achieved substantial success for the economy. There is one statistic that I understand is not, however, challengeable, and that is that over her 11 years, the gap between the richest 10% and the poorest 10% in this country has widened substantially.
That's right.
How can she say at the end of her chapter of British politics that she can justify many people in a constituency such as mine being relatively much poorer off, much less well-housed, and much less well-provided than it was in 1979. Surely she accepts that is not a record that she or any Prime Minister can be proud of.
Mr. Speaker, all levels of income are better off than they were in 1979. But what the honourable member is saying is that he would rather the poor were poorer, provided the rich were less rich. That way you will never create the wealth for better social services as we have. And what a policy! Yes, he would rather have the poor poorer, provided the rich were less rich. That is the Liberal policy. Yes, it came out, he didn't intend it to, but he did. Now,
Order.
it is the extraordinary transformation of the private sector which has created the wealth for better social services, for better pensions, to enable pensioners to have twice as much as they did 10 years ago to leave to their children. No longer the sick man of Europe, our output and investment grew faster over the 80s than any of our major competitors. If you'll be a little bit patient, let me get on a little bit further. No longer a doubtful prospect. When American and Japanese companies invest in Europe, we are their first choice. Britain is no longer an overmanned, inefficient, backward manufacturing sector, but modern, dynamic industries. The right honourable gentleman referred to the level of inflation. Yes, in 1987 and 1988, the economy did expand too fast. There was too much borrowing, and inflation rose. And that's why we had to take the tough, unpopular measures to bring the growth of money supply within target. Inflation has now peaked and will soon be coming down. Inevitably, the economy has slowed, but we firmly expect growth to resume next year. For the fundamentals are right. Our industry is now enterprising. It has been modernized and restructured. In sector after sector, it is our companies which lead the world. In pharmaceuticals, in telecommunications, and in aerospace. Our companies have the freedom and talent to succeed and the will to compete. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm extremely grateful. The Prime Minister is aware that I detest every single one of her domestic policies and have never hid that. But it's always a greater pleasure to tackle a political heavyweight opponent than a lightweight leader of the opposition who is afraid to explain why, after a lifetime of campaigning to get rid of nuclear weapons, is going to plant 3 tridents in my country. But can I take the Prime Minister back? Take the Prime Minister back to the question of the poor getting poorer. Doesn't she realise, even at this point, which is 5 minutes after midnight for her, because there was a transfer of resources from the poor to the wealthy, that's why the poll tax was unacceptable, and it's because of the poll tax she has fallen.
And I think that the honourable gentleman knows that I have the same contempt for his socialist policies as the people of East Europe who have experienced it have it for theirs. I think I must have hit the right nail on the head when I pointed out that the logic of those policies are they'd rather have the poor poorer. Once they start to talk about the gap, they'd rather the gap were that. Down here. That. Not that. But that. So long as the gap is smaller, they'd rather have the poor poorer. You do not create wealth and opportunity that way. You do not create a property-owning democracy that way. Can I get back to the industrial policy from which Scotland has benefited so much and from which it could never have benefited under the government he used to support and under the political policy he espouses now? Yes, our companies have the freedom and talent to succeed and the will to compete. And compete we must. Our competitors won't be taking a break. There must be no hankering after soft options and no going back to the disastrous economic policies of Labour governments. No amount of distance lends enchantment to the lean years of Labour, which gave us the lowest growth rate in Europe, the highest strike record, and for the average family, virtually no increase in take-home pay. Labour's policies are a vote of no confidence in the ability of British people to manage their own affairs. We have that confidence. Confidence in freedom and confidence in enterprise. And that is what divides Conservatives from Socialists. Mr. Speaker, our stewardship of the public finances has been better than that of any government for nearly 50 years. It's enabled us to repay debt and cut taxes. And the resulting success of the private sector has generated the wealth and revenues which pay for better social services, to double the amount being spent to help the disabled, to give extra help to war widows, and vastly to increase spending on the National Health Service, over 1 million more patients being treated each year, and there are 8,000 more doctors and 53,000 more nurses to treat them. That is the record of 11.5 years of Conservative government and Conservative principles. Mr. Speaker, all these are grounds for congratulation, not censure, least of all from the Right Honourable Gentleman, who had no alternative policy.
Order.
I will give way to the Right Honourable Gentleman, and then I'd like to move on to say something about Europe, because what the Right Honourable Gentleman said was, to say the least of it, opaque.
Jack Ashley.
The Prime Minister mentioned disabled people, and she is, as always, anxious to be honest with the House. But would she care to give a wider perspective about what has happened to disabled people under her government? Would she care to confirm the official figures that in the first 10 years of her reign, average male earnings in real value rose by 20%, whereas the benefits of disabled people over that period, in real terms, rose 1%. How well did disabled people do out of that?
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Gentleman is very selective indeed in what he chooses. He knows full well that in the last 11 years we have spent twice as much on the disabled over and above inflation. Not twice as much in cash terms, but twice as much in what the benefits will buy, in particular in mobility and, of course, the Motability Scheme. This has been quite outstanding and has been brought about because we have been able under our policies to create the wealth which created the resources to do that, among other things. Now, Mr. Speaker, over the last 11 years, this government's had a clear and unwavering vision of the future of Europe and of Britain's role in it. It's a vision which stems from our own deep-seated attachment to parliamentary democracy and this government's commitment to economic liberty, to enterprise, to competition and to a free market economy. No government in Europe has fought more resolutely against subsidies, state aids to industry and protectionism, against unnecessary regulation and bureaucracy, against increasing unaccountable central power at the expense of national parliaments. No government has fought more against that in Europe than this one. We've fought attempts to put new burdens and constraints upon industry, such as the social charter, which would take away jobs, in particular part-time jobs. For us, part of the purpose of the community is to demolish trade barriers and to eliminate unfair subsidies so that we can all benefit from a great expansion of trade both within Europe and with the outside world. The fact is that Britain has done more to shape the community over the past 11 years than any other member state. It is Britain which is leading the reform of the common agricultural policy, getting surpluses down, putting a ceiling on agricultural spending. We have been the driving force towards a single market, which when it is completed will be the most significant advance in the community since the Treaty of Rome itself. And we've done more than any other government to resist protectionism, to keep Europe's market open to trade with the rest of the world, and to make a success of the GATT negotiations. Mr. Speaker, we have worked for our vision of a Europe which is free and open to the rest of the world, and above all to the countries of Eastern Europe as they emerge from the shadows of socialism. It wouldn't help them for Europe to become a tight-knit little club, tied up in regulation and restrictions. They deserve a Europe where there's room for their rediscovered sense of nationhood and a place to decide their own destiny after decades of repression. And with all this, Mr. Speaker, we have never hesitated to stand up for Britain's interests. The people of Britain want a fair deal in Europe, particularly over our budget contribution. We have got back nearly £10 billion, which would otherwise have been paid over to the European community under the arrangements negotiated by the party opposite when they were in power. Indeed, what sort of vision do they have, Mr. Speaker? None, according to the right honourable gentleman. They want a Europe of subsidies, a Europe of socialist restrictions, a Europe of protectionism. They want it because that's how they would like to run, or is it to ruin this country? Every time we've stood up and fought for Britain and British interests, the front bench opposite have carped and criticised and moaned. And on the central issues of Europe's future, they will not tell us where they stand. Do they want a single currency? The right honourable gentleman doesn't even know what it means or its consequences for Britain. Does it?
Order!
Absolute nonsense. It was appalling. So he says it's a hypothetical question. It's not going to be a hypothetical question, and someone has to go there and argue knowing what it means. Are they prepared to defend the rights of the United Kingdom Parliament? No, for all that the right honourable gentleman said. For them, it's all compromise. Sweep it under the carpet. Leave it for another day. It might sort out or sort itself, in the hope that people of Britain will not notice
Order!
To them and how the powers would be gradually slipping away. This government will continue to take a positive and constructive approach to the future of Europe. We welcome economic and monetary cooperation. Indeed, no other member state has gone further than Britain in tabling proposals for the next stage, including the hard ECU. But our proposals would work with the market and give people and governments real choice. We want the community to move forward as 12. And from my talks in Paris with other European leaders over these past few days, I'm convinced that that is their aim too. Europe is strongest when it grows through willing cooperation and practical measures, not compulsion nor bureaucratic dreams. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm most grateful to the Prime Minister. Will she tell us whether she intends to continue her own personal fight against a single currency and an independent central bank when she leaves office?
No, she's going to be the governor.
On the present structure...
Order! The Prime Minister.
What a good idea. I hadn't thought of it. But if I were, there'd be no European central bank accountable to no one, least of all to national parliaments. Because the point of that kind of European central bank is no democracy, taking powers away from every single parliament and being able to have a single currency and a monetary policy and an interest rate which takes all political power away from us. As my right honourable friend said in his first speech, after the proposal of a single currency is about the politics of Europe. It is about a federal Europe by the back door. So I'll consider the honourable gentleman's proposal. Now, where were we? I'm enjoying this. Right. Mr. Speaker, I was on.
You can wipe the floor with
I
these
was
people.
talking about Europe. Yes, we know.
Order. Prime Minister.
Now, Mr. Speaker, we were on Europe and the socialist ideal of Europe. Not for us, the corporatism, socialism and central control. We leave those to the benches opposite. Ours is a larger vision of the community, whose member states cooperate with one another more and more closely to the benefit of all. Are we then to be censured for standing up for a free and open Britain in a free and open Europe? No, Mr. Speaker. Our policies
Order.
tune with the deepest instincts of the British people, and we shall win the censure motion, so we shall not be censured for what is thoroughly right. Mr. Speaker, under our leadership, Britain has been just as influential in shaping the wider Europe and the relations between East and West. 10 years ago, the eastern part of Europe lay under totalitarian rule, its people knowing neither rights nor liberties. Today we have a Europe in which democracy, the rule of law and basic human rights are spreading ever more widely, where the threat to our security from the overwhelming conventional forces of the Warsaw Pact has been removed, where the Berlin Wall has been torn down and the Cold War is at an end. These immense changes didn't come about by chance. They have been achieved by strength and resolution in defence, and by a refusal ever to be intimidated. No one in Eastern Europe believes that their countries would be free had it not been for those Western governments who are prepared to defend liberty, who kept alive their hope that one day East Europe too would enjoy freedom. But it was no thanks to the party opposite, nor to the campaign for nuclear disarmament, of which the right honourable gentleman Sheldon is still a member. It is this government which kept the nuclear weapons which ensured that we would never be blackmailed or threatened. When Brezhnev deployed the SS-20s, Britain deployed the cruise missiles and was the first to do so. And all these things were done in the teeth of the opposition, of honourable gentlemen opposite and their ladies. The SS-20s...
Order.
The SS-20s could never have been negotiated away without the bargaining strength which Cruz and Pershing gave to the West. Should we be censured for our strength, or the party opposite for their weakness? I have no doubt that the people of this country will willingly entrust Britain's security in future to a Conservative government which defends them, rather than to socialists who put expediency before principle. And it is principle which is at stake, Mr. Speaker. I must get
Sir Eldon Griffiths.
Could I offer to my right honourable friend one measurement of the immense international respect and affection that she enjoys as a result of her policies of peace through strength. A public opinion poll published in West Coast America last month gave these figures.
Order. Order. Takes a lot of time. I think the honourable gentleman is seeking to participate in the debate. Will you ask a question, please?
These figures. Gorbachev, 74%. Bush, 75%. And Thatcher, 94%.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Bear, and I'm sure they were quite right too. Now, may I say a word or two about the Gulf? Because it is...
Order!
I say a word or two about the situation of the Gulf. It is the thing which will dominate politics until the matter is resolved. And it's principle which is at stake there, Mr. Speaker. Principle and the rule of international law. In my discussions with other heads of government at the CSCE summit in Paris, I found unanimous and impressive determination that Iraq's aggression must not succeed. The resolutions of the United Nations must be implemented in full. That is the peaceful option, Mr. Speaker, and it is there to be taken if Saddam Hussein so chooses. But there is also a very widespread recognition among my colleagues in Paris that the time is fast approaching when the world community will have to take more decisive action to uphold international law and compel Saddam Hussein to leave Kuwait. No one can doubt the dangers which lie ahead. Saddam Hussein has many times shown his contempt for human life, not least for the lives of his own people. He has large armed forces. They are equipped with peculiarly evil weapons, both chemical and biological. Twice in my time, no, Mr. Speaker, not now.
Order!
Twice in my time as Prime Minister, we've had to send our forces across the world to defend a small country against ruthless aggression. First our own people in the Falklands, and now to the borders of Kuwait. To those who have never had to take such decisions, may I say to them that they are taken with a heavy heart in the knowledge of the manifold dangers, but with tremendous pride in the professionalism and courage of our armed forces. There's something else which one feels as well, Mr. Speaker. That is a sense of this country's destiny. The centuries of history and experience which ensure that when principles have to be defended, when good has to be upheld, when evil has to be overcome, then Britain will take up arms. It is because we on this side have never flinched from difficult decisions that this House and this country can have confidence in this government today.